Hey, what's up, guys? Adam Richmond here, and today I want to talk about neutral spine. This is a concept that we talk about a lot in the weight room, and is really one of those key concepts that we need to understand, especially as we start to increase our loads on the bar and increase the intensity of the exercises that we are doing in the weight room. We have to remember and have to be good at finding a neutral spine position and then creating intra-abdominal pressure to maintain that position or to create stability via pressure. So when we talk about in the weight room, really squeeze your abs or brace your core, or any other cue that a lot of coaches might provide, they're not bad, but I think understanding it on a deeper level of what that actually is doing, I think is really valuable. So today I want to go over that with you, and hopefully this will help you in the weight room create a better spinal position and better core stability as we're squatting, deadlifting, benching, lunging, whatever it may be. So I have two drawings up here on the board. The first one is happy smiley face. Disregard my poor art skills, but what we're looking at here is the spine position. So in what I call a neutral spine, we have the neutral curves of the spine. So we have our lumbar spine that is slightly lordotic, so a curve going this way. We then have our thoracic spine, which reverses the curve and is a little bit more kyphotic. And then we have our cervical spine up top that then goes and reverses back into a lordosis curve. And so we have this pelvis position that is slightly tilted forward. So everybody's pelvis is relatively anteriorly tilted to begin with. So 5 to 10 degrees in the literature is what it shows is normal. So we're looking for that position of the pelvis, again, the spinal curves. And then we have to talk about the rib cage as well. We want the rib cage to be more of an internally rotated biased position. So rib cage down and in. And we're going to get that via the abdominals. So if we contract our abdominal muscles, and when I say abdominals, there's a lot of different abdominals in this region. I am not talking about your rectus abdominis, so your six-pack abs. They look good, they're sexy, they're cool, but they're not functional. Their real estate on the pelvis is very small, so they don't do a lot for us when we're talking about creating this neutral spine position and creating intra-abdominal pressure to maintain the position. So we're talking more transverse abdominis, internal, external obliques when we talk about abs here. And then we have the hamstrings that are also going to be a sagittal plane stability muscle for us. So talking about that pelvis and that anterior pelvic tilt, the hamstrings are going to connect to the back of the pelvis and help tilt it backwards or help maintain the position of the relative position of being in this neutral spine. And again, I air quote the neutral spine because it's not one specific movement, it's not one specific position. Rather, it's more just this concept of having some natural curves in the spine and not being in the extremes. So I don't want you to be extremely flexed forward, and I also don't want you to be in any type of really extreme hyperextended position. What I typically see with most athletes is going to be this next picture that we have over here, which is going to be a hyperextended or really driving extension and anterior pelvic tilt. So a lot of times athletes, especially because they're a force and power, because of their need for force and power, they require this constant pushing forward and driving and lifting heavy things and running fast, which a lot of times will put us into this extension pattern, which looks more like this. So we have this excessive anterior pelvic tilt. So the pelvis is rotating forward, which then creates this hyperlordosis in the lumbar spine. And often we'll see a lengthening of the abdominals and the rib cage actually being more externally rotated and flared upward. So when we get that type of position, that's going to change the orientation of the hip socket. So the ball and socket inside of the hip If the socket rotates forward, now your range of motion is in mobility that is going to be available at that joint is going to be different than if it was in a more neutral position. So this is just very basic breakdowns of the biomechanics. I'm not going to go into the nitty gritty of what's going on. I want you to get an overarching understanding of intra-abdominal pressure. So I'm going to leave it at that for now. So again, this anterior pelvic tilt, we have a hyperlordosis. A lot of times we'll see a flattening out of the thoracic curve and not having that nice kyphosis that we're looking for. And again, this is going to create some issues. This is going to create some low back pain. This could create some hip impingement issues. So this could create some shoulder impingement issues. Again, because of the positioning of the thorax and the rib cage is going to change the position of your shoulder blade, which is also the socket for the ball of the arm, right? So when we're not in this relative neutral position with neutral curves, our sockets get oriented into certain positions, which then is not going to allow us to demonstrate appropriate mobility or range of motion at those joints. That's bad news. Again, not going to go into the nitty gritties of this, but I want you to understand that part and why it's important to try to create this neutral spine, again, air quotes, neutral position before we lift or while we're lifting. So, okay, great, Adam, that sounds great. I like what you're saying. How do I do that? Okay, so that's a good question. What we want to try to do is, first and foremost, when we set up for a lift, again, I don't care if it's, dumbbell bench, squat, lunge, deadlift, I want you to try to back pocket tuck or take your pelvis from this anterior pelvic position to a neutral position or a less anteriorly tilted position. So we're going to posteriorly tilt it. So what that should look like is if I'm here and I'm anteriorly tilted, my butt's out, my ribs are up, and I have a lot of pressure in my low back right now, the first thing I'm going to do is find my heels. So I'm going to take my weight and shift it from my toes, and I'm going to shift it back to my heels. So now my weight is primarily on my heels. I'm going to pretend like somebody has their thumb in my back pocket and they're pulling that down towards my knee or my ankle. So I'm going from this position to this back pocket tuck. So I went from here to here. So now I have this nice level pelvis position. I've taken some pressure off my low back. Now I need to get that rib cage from up here and flared to down and internally rotated. To do that, I'm going to set up with a nice breath. So I'm going to breathe in through my nose and I'm going to exhale. As I get that long, exaggerated exhale, my abdominal muscles kick in and pull that rib cage down into that internally rotated position. So now I have a back pocket tuck. I feel my heels and a little bit of hamstrings that helped me do the tuck. I exhaled, I found abdominals and brought my rib cage down. So now I'm in this nice neutral spine position, and I'm going to hold those abdominal contraction on as I take a nice breath in. Now, as I took that breath in, I've created pressure, right? As I took that breath in, my guts and everything inside my stomach wanted to push forward and let my abs do this again, but I kept my abs on. I kept this contraction and created interior abdominal pressure, which is now what is creating that stability that we need to lift heavy things. So that being a deadlift, a squat, whatever it may be, creating that intra-abdominal pressure via a neutral pelvis position, ribs down, finding abdominals, and then taking a nice breath in helps us to maintain this relative neutral position as we go through and lift heavy things. So that may be, again, a deadlift, a squat, a lunge, anything you do in the weight room with extra resistance, we need some intra-abdominal pressure. How much intra-abdominal pressure is dictated by how much we're lifting, right? So a 500-pound deadlift is going to require a big giant breath, a lot of bracing, a lot of just compression, which is going to limit motion in the spine, limit motion in other places as well, which is a good thing. We don't want a lot of motion in the spine whenever we're lifting really heavy stuff. The opposite is going to be true if we're doing more of like a split squat. So maybe a goblet loaded, kettlebell goblet loaded split squat. I don't need to brace and just squeeze everything and compress the crap out of everything because I want more motion there. I need to disassociate my hips. I need hip extension and hip flexion. But I still want to try to maintain some semblance of this neutral spine position, so that way I have control of intra-abdominal pressures and can push the pressures around to help me rotate and to help me to move through space. That's how we rotate, is by pushing pressures forward and backwards, and pushing pressures and fluids in different places allows me to create different mobility, different ranges of motion at different joints. Again, not going to go down that rabbit hole too much deeper than that, but again, I want you to have a relative understanding of what we're doing. So again, just to review that real quickly, back pocket tuck. So we want to get out of that anterior pelvic tilt. We want to back pocket tuck. Find some heels, use your hamstrings to tuck you under. You should feel a little bit of glute and a little bit of hamstrings. Let me move that down here. So you should feel a little bit of glute and hamstring right at the butt crack crease, or the crease of your butt cheek right here, right? So we're tucking, we feel some tension here, holding that on, and then we want to do our exhale, so our ribs are up. Exhale, ribs go down, abdominals kick in. Keep the abdominals on. Nice little breath in if we're trying to just do a split squat or something lower level, and then we can breathe through that as we exercise, but always maintaining the abdominals. If we're trying to do a big heavy deadlift or 1 RM, and we're really going for it, we're gonna really take a big breath in, really lock everything, brace everything down, really hard contraction as I go through that deadlift, and really pull that heavy weight. So hopefully that makes sense. I want you to think about that before every lift, before everything we do. Really, really easy with my programming. If you're one of my clients or athletes, typically your big lift of the day, we want more of that heavy compression contraction, right? We're really getting after things. And then the rest of the accessory work is more mobility driven. We're working on hypertrophy, we're working on other qualities as well, but I don't want this big lockdown braced position where we're just grinding through. I want you to think more relaxed compression, more abdominals, but being able to breathe over top of it while you maintain the pressure in the abdominals. I hope that makes sense. If you have any questions, please feel free to hit me up. Shoot me an email, shoot me a text, or hit me up on Instagram or Facebook, DM or comment below. Thanks.